topic 2, we will now be looking at the signs and symptoms of trauma. How do we spot and recognize this in the people that we're working with and serving? All people who experience trauma get stuck in a place of mental and emotional, what's called dysregulation in their brain and body. This is called the trauma adversity cycle. Is that someone who is in a toxic environment with stress and in unsafe relationships begins to experience dysregulation in their body, which is that fight or flight survival sense that is in our brain and body protecting us. So their nervous system gets activated and their body is on edge. And what happens is that's how we see the signs and symptoms of trauma, the effects of trauma long-term in someone come out of their life, emotions, behavior, because we are seeing that dysregulated state affect them, and it affect their mental and emotional health and how they're relating to people in the environment. And so dysregulation is the impaired ability to regulate, to come back down and calm, and or tolerate negative emotional states associated with our interpersonal trauma and post-traumatic stress. And so it's healing of trauma truly is the journey of seeking to regulate as a person or regulate someone else, and in such a manner that someone learns to begin to manage their trauma-fueled emotions that are unresolved in the body. So the journey of regulation is the ability to manage and appropriately respond to the experience of our emotions in life, remaining within that place of balance, the window of tolerance. And so that refers to the ability to experience intense positive and negative moods and emotions without feelings becoming hijacked and overwhelming, or employing protective strategies that are unhealthy, such as numbing, dissociation, alcohol and drugs, or other negative coping defenses. So some of the patterns in people raised with a history of toxic stress in their environment and unsafe relationships that are traumatic is many people will experience anxiety without a reason and deep mental health issues, if not serious mental health diagnosis, such as SMI, serious mental illness. And many people struggle with the sense of shame, guilt, and blaming themselves, and experiencing deep wrestle with suicidality, questioning life purpose and worth. And so mental health we see as a huge thing that's affected for people, as well as experiencing spiritual existential crisis, which happens when someone experiences the tension between their belief and life and experience and where those come into tension and wrestle, such as there's a good and loving God who protects me and is with me, and I was sexually abused and assaulted for years in my home. God, why? Where are you? And so there's definitely spiritual effects of trauma people go through. There's all kinds of memory and emotional flashbacks, difficulty regulating and controlling someone's emotions. We see in trauma that unresolved trauma-fueled emotions, such as shame, guilt, anger, are some of the main ways we see that affect people in their relationships. People living into risky behaviors, coming from a place of their unmet needs to get those needs met. This could look like casual sexual encounters where more abuse or assault is experienced. This could be engaging with substances and seeking to numb out, or other adrenaline, dopamine seeking behaviors that are unhealthy or unsafe. People living into hypervigilance. This is the idea that this person drove a white BMW and now every white BMW I see, it must be them and they found me and I'm in danger. There's also lots of fear with trusting people and difficulty being in relationship with people, isolating, really pulling away from people, and experiencing dissociation, which is really that freezing out and numbing mentally and emotionally, and going up into that headspace and not really being fully present in life and in relationships. So these are just some examples of the ways we begin to see and recognize trauma in someone. And this also has to do with even the way we see people coping and living. And so we see a massive even link and connection between the idea of addiction and trauma. And there's a lot of modern research in psychology as well as in the medical field that for some people in their conviction, there is no such thing as addiction without trauma, and that those statistics and links run so deep with people who've experienced those ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which is childhood trauma, and the connection to those people who grow up to be adults who even struggle with mental health issues, as well as physical health and serious addiction issues for the rest of their life, potentially. So, how do we see the difference between dysregulated and regulated people? So, dysregulated people are in the most primal survival back part of the brain. In the brainstem, it's very animalistic. For all of us, it's very fast and reactive, taking very little energy to function. And so it's in that fight or flight survival state. Whereas regulated people are in the front of their brain in the prefrontal cortex in logic and reasoning. They're able to go more slow and make more intentional and deliberate choices and be relationally connected to others. So every person has a window of tolerance in their brain and body. And so this is actually something that unites and connects those who have never experienced trauma to people with a deep trauma history. The way we can understand one another and find connection and unity is actually in this idea of the window of tolerance. So each one of us have space before we blow and we react emotionally. And that's what the window of tolerance is. It's the place of regulation where we're able to experience life and have space to respond in a healthy manner and to cope. And so the middle place in the window is the place of regulation, calm and balance in our brain and body, in our emotions and life, when we're able to be connected and relational to people in a healthy way. So anything above that window or below are what's considered states of dysregulation, when we are not living from a place of balance. And now in our brain and body, we have biochemicals such as cortisol that are racing, that are speeding up our heart rate, muscle tension, and we are no longer in the logic place of our brain, but we're beginning to go to more primal states in our brain in that fight or flight survival response. And so the journey of the window of tolerance is learning to see this in oneself so we can grow in self-awareness and emotional regulation for maturity and health, but also for breakthrough and healing. Because part of our trauma is actually stored in the body and our body responses and the triggers and activation we feel and experience in the body. And so that's part of this journey. So above the window is called hyper arousal. That's the fight or flight response place. It's very hyper vigilant, reactive, this hostile, more anxious and defensive place we find ourselves in emotionally. An image that's been used to represent above the window is the idea of a dragon or the Hulk. The Hulk when he's the green monster. And this, it kind of represents this state where we see someone really who is emotionally dysregulated and upset. And so below the window is the place of what's called hypoarousal. It's that freeze, shut down, numb, kind of disconnected space where we see dissociation, someone being really shut down, flat and numb emotionally. It's when you walk into the room and it's a sense of someone being almost a wallflower with no personality, really disconnected and disembodied. And another image used for below the window is the idea of a turtle. And these are two survival states. So we see the trauma responses that people have in this window of tolerance model. And they're different ways of survival. They're not wrong or bad, but part of our growth and healing is learning to see where we're at in my body, 0 to 10. Where am I at? Am I almost fully shut down, disconnected? Is my heart racing and my muscles tense? And do I want to yell? Am I really hyper aroused? And learning to see those signs so that we can take steps to regulate and bring ourselves back down into the window of tolerance. And this is so that we don't say or do things that we regret. So we see that people with a history of trauma and toxic stress have a smaller window before they get dysregulated, above or below. And so one is not right or wrong. There's just different survival states people have learned from their environments and the trauma they've experienced. For example, someone may have experienced in their home that every time their father was drinking and they were going to be physically abused, they may get really quiet and go back into their closet and hide and shut down in a turtle state response so that they would be safe and survive in that environment and maybe not be found and not have to experience that for the evening. Now, another person in their home may have experienced the idea of standing up and fighting back to defend and protect a younger sibling in domestic violence, and they took on the state of a Hulk to fight and survive and try to stop what was happening. And so different environments, people have learned different coping and survival ways of dysregulation. And these things have really helped people survive different spaces. But now, into adulthood in their life and relationships, these survival responses aren't working anymore and they're not helpful. And so, really, for people to have better functioning in life and relationships, they're needing to begin to see this in themselves and where they're at, 0 to 10, and learn to take steps of regulation to come back down. So the way the body balances naturally is that there's adaptations and mitigations. Adaptations is when someone stands to taking aggressive, assertive, and hostile action to resolve or to control a situation. And so this is the idea of a kid who's experiencing physical abuse at home and at school steps up to fight other children to deal with some of that unresolved anger. Then there's mitigation, which is acting in a way to minimize the risk and experiences or sensations that are being experienced that are unpleasant or dangerous. And so mitigation is the idea of avoidance and moving away from something. And in the mitigation place, this is where we find addiction to substances as a form of coping, and suicidality, behaviors like self-harm. And so these are just some of the ways that the body tries to balance and bring itself back down to a place of regulation. So as well, on someone's journey of healing of trauma, they generally have patterns of behavior that they've learned in survival to be able to make it in the terrible environment and relationships and experiences they've been in. And so this is where compassion comes in for us, because instead of us seeing wrong, bad behavior, bad people, we see and understand, wow, what happened? What happened that your environment and relationships were so unsafe that you had to resort to numbing out on this substance to survive? And so then the journey for people is learning healthier ways of coping and to not turn to old addictive cycles and patterns or of seeking risky behavior in order to regulate themselves.